Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, May 6, 2026, time in Texas, about 11 a.m., a flash update. So has China whipped up another bioweapon? I wonder. And President Trump pauses Operation Freedom. We have U.S. intel on that. So let's get started. So let's talk about first space weather. So we have information coming out from NOAA and also from YouTube space weather site, Ben Davidson, that the weakening of Earth's electromagnetic shield is not only letting in more radiation from the sun, but additional impacts from space. As Mike from Around the World talked about years ago, waves of energy. So with our weakening electromagnetic shield, what's coming from space includes galactic energy. And yesterday we had an unexpected G2, no overt typical source for a geomagnetic storm from the sun. No sunspots, no flares, no solar wind. Instead, NOAA put out a shock wave of unknown sourcing. I submit NOAA knows exactly what hit the Earth and is not being forthcoming and shies away from putting forth the obvious, that the weakening electromagnetic shield around the Earth is going to be letting in more space energy, which will impact our planet, and also human health and crops and weather and so on. So that's going on. So they say today we have a G1 geomagnetic storm as a residual from the G2 yesterday. So that's going on. And we have this. So we're hearing more about this ship, the Hanta, and it's now 3 deaths and 8 cases of hantavirus, who is putting forth may have been passed human to human. I submit this, that hantavirus, typically humans contract Hanta, according to the literature, from dried particles from infected mice or rats, from their dried saliva, urine or feces. The particles float in the air, the human breathes it in, which takes a considerable amount of exposure. And now we're asked to believe that on this ship, or possibly when the passengers got off at some of these island locations, that they came in contact with enough particles in the air from dried mouse contact sources for a long enough period of time to contract the disease. And then they're putting forth this possibility that the hantavirus has mutated so that it is now passed human to human. I submit, I find this all hard to believe. However, recall in 2020, we saw globally a bioweapon, COVID, being put out in all nations, and now we know that bioweapon was whipped up and mutated in a lab in Wuhan, China. Can it be that China has now been working on hantavirus in a lab to make it a bioweapon? I'm just saying. And we have this. So the cruise ship, the Hanta, is now near Cape Verde Island off of Africa. And its next port would be Tenerife in the Canary Islands. But the government of Tenerife this morning said, you can't land here. Excuse me. Now, I don't blame the government of Tenerife. This is a small island that obviously would not have the medical facilities to quarantine people and deal with a pandemic. Instead, most of the passengers on the Hanta are UK or Spanish citizens. Spain said the ship can come to Madrid, and then Spain would take the people off and put them in quarantine at a military base. So that's going on. But keep your eye on China and bioweapon. We have this from U.S. Intel. Another indicator of the pending implosion of global economies. I put out yesterday from U.S. Intel information from J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest U.S. bank, that most nations only had reserves that could possibly last a short time into the future. And at the end of May, we could see oil $200 a barrel. In September, $500 a barrel. Goldman Sachs is, according to U.S. Intel, is now adding to this warning to its clients, saying that globally, most nations only have a 100-day supply of oil, as can be calculated if the situation in the Strait of Hormuz continues with the strangulation of the supply of global oil. So that's going on from Israeli News Live. We're coming out with some information about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz and what's going on between Iran and the U.S. Israeli News Live, Stephen Beene, former CIA, puts out that Iran's claim that it fired 2 missiles at 2 warships in the area of the channel the U.S. military had provided through the Strait of Hormuz that was close to the land area of the Gulf states. And the U.S., when it began Project Freedom, today's Wednesday, I believe that began Sunday, we do have verification from Salem, what's up with shipping, that he received verification from government and military sources that when Project Freedom began, the U.S. successfully brought out 2 U.S. flagged vessels. One has been identified from Marsk as the San Antonio. The second vessel has not been identified, but I can put forth this from reliable sources. The U.S. did successfully bring out 2 U.S. flagged ships at the beginning of Project Freedom. And we saw also yesterday Iran hitting the UAE 5 to 7 times, hitting one of their oil facilities at the Fujairah port, and then UAE militarily responding to Iran yesterday with hits on Iran's facility at Bandar Abbas and hitting Iran's Qasem Island, a small island by which Iran was extracting tolls for certain vessels to be able to leave the Strait of Hormuz. So we see that going on. Now, we're hearing claims that yesterday Iran hit or fired missiles at 2 U.S. ships that were transiting this channel and associated with Project Freedom, and that Iran possibly hit 2 KC-135 refuelers that were up in the air over the Strait of Hormuz. We are getting more information about that. We're also getting information that Iran has missile silos buried in the ground, ostensibly unknown to the U.S. military. This includes 1,000 Fatah-2 hypersonic missiles. CNN is reporting also near Isfahan, one of the locations that the U.S. hit in Midnight Hammer, that Iran is now taking extra precautions in that area, roadblocks and closing off entrances. It's being speculated that Iran is once again juicing up a nuclear weapon in this area. And so that's going on. And we're hearing this from Navy Channel. We heard recently that the U.S. took out 6 of the small speedboats of Iran. This was done by Navy Seahawk helicopters and Army helicopters Apache. So we have more details on that. And that the U.S. has standing ready F-15s, 16s, 35s to be used in the U.S. military's next hit on Iran, which, according to sources, could be tomorrow. May 7 may be D-Day for Iran. So I say to the IRGC in Iran, it would be good for you to make your peace with God. And we have this from Crux. So we heard late yesterday that President Trump is pausing Operation Freedom. And it's being put forth. This is due to Iran firing missiles at 2 ships, but also that Iran possibly could have hit 2 KC-135 refuelers. Now, with regard to the refuelers, U.S. intel revealed yesterday that early in the morning, 1 KC-135 was squawking distress signal 7700, and that it did not return to its home base in Qatar. I put out, and then we, a couple of hours later, simultaneous. So these 2 events happened at the same time. 2 KC-135 refuelers, both squawking 7700 distress. We had information on one that did not return to its base in Qatar. We do not have further information on the second refueler. I put out yesterday that they were missing, and this is still my position because I don't have sources about where they are. So it appears that President Trump took these events into reckoning and paused Operation Freedom. Now, I submit that the U.S. military, in their next hit on Iran, is going to maximize its hits and destroy everything in Iran that could pose a threat to the U.S. military or to global oil shipping. So that's coming. President Trump has paused Operation Freedom. And as I've said, I have verified that 2 U.S. ships at the beginning of Operation Freedom did pass through the strait, most likely with their transponders off. And we have U.S. intel plus information coming out from Professor Marandi of Iran, who was interviewed today on Danny Hauppauge's YouTube channel, that Iran has taken down 2 KC-135 refuelers. As I said, I do not know the status of these 2 refuelers. I can verify from U.S. intel sources that these 2 KC-135s yesterday morning simultaneously were putting out their 7700 distress signal, and that one of the refuelers did not return to its base in Qatar. So that's going on. This concludes my flash. It's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.